Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Nancy Gallagher, Director of the Center on International and Security Studies at Maryland. On behalf of the School of Public Policy at the University of Maryland and the other members of the Big Ten Collaboration on Democracy in the 21st Century, especially the Glenn College at The Ohio State University and the Ford School at the University of Michigan, I'd like to welcome you to this webinar on Ukraine, Implications for Democracy in the United States and Globally. I want to begin with special thanks to our two panelists, Senator Ben Cardin from Maryland and Senator Rob Portman from Ohio, both senior members of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. They are well positioned to help us understand what the nearly 4-month-old invasion of Ukraine by Russia means for democracy in this country and around the world. The Big Ten Democracy Collaboration began in fall of 2020 as a discussion among the conference's schools of public policy on how our campuses and communities could conduct safe, fair, and fully accessible elections during a global pandemic. The collaboration now has grown to include all 14 universities in the Big Ten and is addressing major challenges facing our self-governed democracy as it nears its 250th birthday. Students have heard from leading policymakers and experts on election reform, climate change, civic education, judicial reform, and today's topic, global democracy. They've taken part in policy simulations on real legislative issues facing Congress, and they've led constructive debates on difficult issues, and they've learned how to turn debate into civic action, particularly voting. The events of January 6, 2001 threw into stark relief how divided Americans are about our democratic institutions and whether we will even have a democracy in the years to come. That is up to Americans to decide. In February of this year, Russia invaded Ukraine and tried to impose its preferred form of government on that country. The tenacity of Ukrainians' struggle to preserve their sovereignty has been closely watched by contestants in the global fight between democracy and autocracy. The United States and a number of other democratic countries have provided extensive military and humanitarian assistance to Ukraine, even as we grapple with our own threats to democracy at home. Moderating today's discussion is Dr. Charles Wise, the founding dean of the Glenn School, and from 1994 to 2013, the project director of the Parliamentary Development Project, funded by the U.S. Agency for International Development to assist the Parliament of Ukraine in developing as a democratic institution. Dr. Wise will introduce Senator Portman, who will share opening remarks, and Senator Cardin. He will then ask the senators questions that were submitted by members of our audience upon registration. I will then introduce the student member of our panel, Dmitry Nilov, a graduate student at the University of Maryland, and he will ask questions submitted by Big Ten student members of our audience during today's discussion. We ask all student viewers to submit questions into the chat regarding the impact of the Ukraine crisis on democracy, and we will address as many questions as possible in the time we have remaining. Dr. Wise, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nancy. Well, Russia's aggression against Ukraine constitutes the largest military confrontation in Europe since World War II and has caused the most civilian and combatant casualties since that time. The United Nations, the Council of Europe, the United States Congress, and the administration, as well as other governments around the world, have condemned Russia's unprovoked and unjustified aggression against Ukraine. And they have demanded that Russia completely and unconditionally withdraw its forces from the territory of Ukraine and have reaffirmed the right of Ukraine to choose its own destiny. It is gratifying to me to see so many of the world's democracies respond so far. I worked with parliamentarians in the Verkhovna Rada, Ukraine's parliament, for 22 years as they strove to develop Ukrainian democracy after centuries of colonial domination by other countries, most recently Russia. I witnessed how dedicated Ukrainian government and civil society leaders and Ukrainian citizens were to the Ukrainian democracy project. Vladimir Putin may have been surprised by the fierce defense by Ukrainians of their democracy, but I was not. Earlier, Putin's preferred president, Viktor Yanukovych, tried to turn Ukraine away from European democracy and exclusively into the Russian orbit. The Ukrainian people rebelled. My project staff was there during the demonstrations when Ukrainian leaders and citizens faced down the security forces Yanukovych had mounted and that were shooting at the demonstrators with live ammunition, and witnessed the success of the Ukrainian citizens in thwarting then President Yanukovych's edict to turn Ukraine away from the West and toward Russian subjugation. What the world is witnessing now is not just Ukrainian dedication to defense of their homes and their culture, but also to their democracy. Today, I am so pleased to hear the views of our two senators who have been leading the efforts in the Senate to support Ukrainian democracy. First, it's my pleasure to welcome Senator Ben Cardin. Senator Cardin is the senior senator for the state of Maryland, currently serving his third term in the United States Senate. Senator Cardin is a senior member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Since 2015, he has served as a special representative on anti-Semitism, racism, and intolerance for the 57-nation Organization Security and Cooperation in Europe Parliamentary Assembly. Senator Cardin has a long history of working across the aisle, particularly with Senator Portman, dating back to their time together in the House Ways and Means Committee. He also recently joined several Democrat and Republican colleagues in the Senate to introduce the Ukraine Democracy Lend-Lease Act, which would authorize the president to provide military equipment necessary to protect vulnerable civilian populations from a military Russian invasion. I'm also informed that Senator Cardin is an honorary Maryland Terrapin by virtue of the fact that his granddaughter has now graduated from the University of Maryland. So Senator Cardin, we welcome your introductory statement, and then we will proceed with Senator Portman.
Dr. Wise, thank you very much for that very generous introduction. Yes, I did pay some tuition to the University of Maryland for my granddaughter, so I guess I do get some of those privileges. A great school, Ohio State, a great campus, great school, two great universities coming together to have this forum on democracy collaboration. It couldn't be more timely. Democracies have been under attack. We know that. If you look at the statistics, we've seen a decline in democratic states, free states, over the last 20 years. And now we're seeing this accelerated by Mr. Putin's activities. So thank you so much for having this forum and this discussion. I couldn't be with a person I have more respect for on the subject than Rob Portman. The two of us, as you pointed out, have been friends for a long time. Rob, a Republican, I'm a Democrat. We've worked across party line since our days in the House of Representatives to do good things for the people of this country. We may have some different views on some of the issues, but we recognize we have to talk, work together, and get things done. On Ukraine, we share the same views. Rob Portman has been one of our great leaders on Ukraine. As the chair of our caucus on Ukraine, has brought in a lot of government officials from Ukraine to meet with us during this crisis. Rob and I traveled to Ukraine together to monitor an election. I've been to Ukraine many times under my responsibilities in the Helsinki Commission. Dr. Wise, I was also there during the protests in the Maidan, seeing the energy of the people from Ukraine, and I was not surprised. I knew that Mr. Putin would never be able to crush their spirit of independence. That was not going to happen. I think what surprised many of us was the courage of the leadership, as well as the people of Ukraine, to stay and fight and to organize and to be able to maintain the control of their country. I don't think many of us thought they would be as successful as they have been. Not that they're not under tremendous stress today, they are, but we really do applaud their spirit, and we know they're going to win this war. We know that. And we hope that it will happen sooner rather than later, and we'll be able to return Ukraine to the type of growth that we were seeing before Mr. Putin's invasion. Just very quickly, I am very proud of the leadership of the United States, what we've been able to do. We have isolated the Russian Federation in regards to its attack on Ukraine. Ukraine's the front line on defense of the democratic states. We recognize that if we didn't stop Mr. Putin in Ukraine, we know that Moldova and Georgia would be next, then Finland and Sweden, and maybe even our NATO allies in the Baltic states. So this was a campaign that had direct impact on the security of the United States and our allies. So our strategy has been pretty clear. We have a unified position to provide the defensive equipment that Ukraine needs to defend itself. I think we've provided about $6 billion here in the United States, and our allies around the world have provided significant help. Countries that never took sides are taking sides on support of Ukraine and democracy. Countries that don't normally provide these types of military assistance are providing these types of military assistance. We go beyond that. We're also isolating Mr. Putin through sanctions that have really isolated the country and isolated the individuals responsible. We've gotten great unity in the global community on these sanctions. We are providing humanitarian assistance for people who have been dislocated, both within Ukraine and their surrounding countries, where we have so many families that have left the conflict zone that are being housed in other countries. We're participating in that. And most importantly, we are committed to holding Mr. Putin and those responsible for these atrocities accountable for their war crimes. So I am proud of the unity we have, and this is clearly the leadership of both the Democrats and Republicans have been very much together on this, and one of the great leaders on this issue has been Senator Portman.
Thank you, Senator Cardin. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Senator Rob Portman. Senator Portman was elected in 2011 to the United States Senate, where he's co-chair of the bipartisan Senate Ukraine caucus and a member of the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations. Senator Portman first visited Ukraine in 2014 after Euromaidan, a time of demonstration and civil unrest in Ukraine, serving as an election observer along with Senator Cardin with the Organization for Security Cooperation in Europe. He has since authored significant legislation to support Ukraine, including the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, which has provided Ukraine with more than $2 billion in security assistance funding. Since his initial visit to Ukraine in 2014, he has visited the country on 5 more occasions. His most recent visit was to meet with President Zelensky and his senior cabinet in January of this year. Senator Portman has taught courses in the Glenn College of Public Affairs at Ohio State and currently serves on the Glenn College Advisory Board. He is the recipient of the Glenn College's Excellence in Public Service Award, and this May was awarded an honorary doctorate from Ohio State University for his public service. Senator Portman, welcome.
Charlie, thank you so much. You can hear the bells in the background because we are in the session here and about to start voting. I wanted to just very briefly follow on with what Senator Cardin said so well and be able to get to questions as quickly as possible, given that we may have some other responsibilities we've got to run to. Let me start though, Charlie, and thank you. You and I have been friends a long time, and when you were at IU and then later at Ohio State, you played a key role in helping Ukraine get back on its feet. And really since 1991, you've been involved with these issues. I remember when you were over there advising the Rada, their parliament, on democracy building and how to fight corruption and deal with the oligarchs and help Ukraine to be able to get out from under its Russian past and its Soviet past. And so thank you for that. To Ben Cardin, he's chair of the Helsinki Commission. He is an expert on democracy, and that's essential right now, to have people who really understand how we can ensure we have not just great alliances for the United States all over the world, because democratic countries tend to stick together, but importantly, that the people of the world have the opportunity to live in freedom and to chart their own course in life. And that's, ultimately what democracies are about. We are the oldest democracy, but we also are the leader globally. And as I see what's happening in Latin America today, the coups in Africa, I see China's influence in the Indo-Pacific area, certainly see what's going on with regard to Putin's attack on a democracy, a sovereign country in Ukraine. I do worry about this shift. I think Ukraine was, frankly, one of the great examples that countered the trend. In other words, Ukraine made a decision in 2014, and following an earlier decision, actually in 1991, to turn to the West, to turn to democracy and freedom. And that's one reason I feel so strongly that we need to be engaged and involved. I also feel it because, as Senator Cardin said so well, it's not going to end with the Donbass. In other words, if Putin is successful in defeating the Ukrainian forces in the eastern part of Ukraine, he will continue to move on, listen to his own words. And I don't think it's unreasonable for those countries in the region to be as concerned as they are, particularly the Baltic countries and Finland, because of what he has said. Also, I'm reminded of the fact that the Budapest Memorandum, which goes back to 1994, when the wall came down, Ukraine had nuclear weapons, and they agreed to forego those weapons to give up their nuclear arsenal in exchange for security guarantees from the United States of America, from the UK, from Russia, that we would respect their territorial integrity. So there is a responsibility here, and it's very specific to us, but there's also a broader responsibility here, which is that we are in America, sometimes by destiny rather than choice, a country that provides the leadership for freedom around the world. So I thank you all very much for having me on today. The one issue I do want to just throw on the table, and perhaps some questions could come with this to dig a little deeper. We have provided them significant help. About $21 billion of the $40 billion that was just appropriated for Ukraine went for military help, as an example. And yet the question I have is, are we sending them the right military equipment with that $40 and $21 billion? I'm concerned about that, because what's happening today in the Donbass as we talk is that the Russians continue to shell Ukrainian cities, kill Ukrainian soldiers, 100 to 500 a day, based on a meeting we had last week with members, leadership of the Rada, who were in Washington. And unfortunately, they're taking ground slowly but surely in the Donbass, making incremental progress and beginning to win the war in that area. Why? Because the Russians are using longer range artillery, and the Ukrainians can't reach them with their shorter range artillery. So the need for us to provide Ukraine with what they need just to be able to have a fighting chance has never been greater. And so my hope, and I know Senator Cardin's hope, is that part of this 40 billion and the 21 billion for military goes for more of this equipment that we just sent them. We simply sent them 4 units. They need dozens of these units, which is this longer range rocket launchers called HIMARS, was our product. The Germans have just sent them 3. The UK has just sent them 3. They need more, and they need them quickly in order to ensure that there is not a shift here in the war effort, and that Russia does not succeed in its immediate objective, which is to take all of the Donbass. And again, beyond that, of course, it will continue. So with that, I would love to get to the questions. And again, thank you very much for having us on this Big Ten conversation. Thanks, Charlie.
Great. Thank you. Well, I think Senator Portman anticipated my first question and answered it, which is that Russia is estimated to have a 10-to-1 edge in artillery. And President Zelensky has said that Ukraine needs many more armaments than is being provided by the US and Europe at this point. And Ukraine's foreign minister has said all in all that the arms pledged are not close to what Ukraine needs. So Senator Portman, I think you've answered this, but I'll turn to Senator Cardin and ask him, are the US and the allies providing supplies in too little quantity and too slowly at this point? And if so, what do we do about it?
I think we have seen historic effort made to provide global needs coming together for Ukraine. The supply chain has been throughout all of our allies and beyond those that are not traditional allies in these types of campaigns. We have provided Ukraine with a tremendous amount of capacity. President Zelensky, I admire him greatly. He is a fantastic communicator and negotiator, and he has done his country well. Yes, he needs more. He will always need more, but he's been very strategic on being able to get the delivery of defensive equipment necessary to protect, particularly against air defense and tanks, and also at the sea now. So do I think we can do more? We need to do more? Yes. Can we do better? Yes. But I'm extremely proud of the timely supplies that have been made available that have gotten into the country, that have gotten to the front lines. This has been a real unified global effort. And I know President Zelensky, every time we talk with him, is always very, very complimentary and thankful for the leadership of the United States and the help of the global community against Russia.
Thank you. My next question is, what is your assessment of where the war in Ukraine stands today? Is Russia or Ukraine winning? And how long could active military action persist? Senator Portman?
Well, Charlie, as I said earlier, I'm concerned that in the Donbass in particular, where Russia has chosen to focus its efforts, they are outgunning the Ukrainians and therefore making incremental progress. That's public information, but we also have heard it from the Ukrainian parliamentarians who met with us as part of the Ukraine caucus last week, including one of the leaders of the Ukrainian legislature, who is also one of the lead negotiators with the Russians when they were talking previously. His view is very simple, that Putin will not negotiate until he takes all of the Donbass, and then he will take steps to take additional parts of Ukraine. And so that he does not believe that there's a seriousness about negotiations. There only would be if we were to provide more help to them now to be able to stop the onslaught in the Donbass and begin to push them back, rather than having the Russians continue to destroy these cities in the Donbass and kill, as I said, between 100 and 500 troops a day, in addition to, of course, many civilian deaths, because they are targeting civilian apartments, schools, churches, and so on. The one thing that I would say, Charlie, is that there are parts of Ukraine where the Ukrainians are making progress. Kharkiv is one. It's not, again, the kind of progress that we would all hope, but it is incremental progress in the right direction, including pushing the Russians in one area north of Kharkiv all the way back to the Russian border. Also in the south, there is some evidence of Ukrainians not just holding the line, the old line of contact, which is what they called the border between where the Russian occupation was in essence and Ukraine, but making some inroads. And that is very important, because the next step in the Russian process, I believe, will be to move further to the east and south and take Odessa, and therefore have a pathway to go to Transnistria and Moldova, and essentially landlock Ukraine. And already Ukraine has effectively been landlocked because they have mined the harbors, of course, including not allowing any ships to leave Odessa. And Charlie, the one thing that's very discouraging is that in the last couple of weeks, we've seen two instances where Russians have deliberately targeted Ukrainian grain bins. And so some of this wheat and other grains, the sunflowers and the corn and other things that Ukrainians are famous for exporting, is actually being destroyed systematically by the Russians as it sits in bins near these harbors. That to me is just another level of the Russian totally reprehensible approach to this war, which is targeting civilians, now targeting food and using food as a weapon. So I think there's an incremental progress being made by the Russians in the key area, the Donbass, but there are other areas where the Ukrainians are making some progress. Overall, though, I think my biggest concern is we do not have the firepower in the hands of the Ukrainians to be able to respond. The Russians can sit back and fire these missiles with immunity because the Ukrainians cannot reach them with their shorter range missiles.
Okay, thank you. Senator Cardin, I have another question for you, if I might. Sure. Numerous leaders of countries assisting Ukraine have said that Russia must not be allowed to prevail in Ukraine, and the world's democracies must help Ukraine win. What, in your estimation, constitutes a Ukraine win? Is it pushing Russian forces back to the lines of February 24th? Or is it pushing Russia out of all the Donbass and the southern regions it now occupies? Or is it pushing Russia out of all internationally recognized territory, including Crimea?
Well, clearly our position is the latter. We believe that Russia has no legitimacy at all in the control of Crimea or in any of the territories that it currently is now controlling. So we are supporting the Ukrainian position that all of that territory should be under the control of Ukraine. and Russia needs to remove its troops, and that needs to be part of any settlement. So that is clearly our position. Now, we recognize that Ukraine is a sovereign state. We will strongly support their position in regards to how we can reduce the hostilities and move towards peace. President Zelensky has said he's willing to continue his conversations as to how we can eliminate the violence. But let me say, winning this war is not just satisfying Ukraine's sovereignty and making sure that they retain control or have control over their entire country. It's also holding those perpetrators responsible for the atrocities they've committed. That's an international offense. It's not just the war activities against Ukrainian people. It's also that this offends the global community on crimes against humanity. And there needs to be accountability to have a successful completion of this war, with Ukraine winning, holding those responsible for these atrocities accountable, either in Ukraine or at some international venue, or both.
I see. Senator Portman, I have another question for you. In an address to the Russian entrepreneurs on the 350th anniversary of Peter the Great's birth, Putin appeared to link his invasion of Ukraine and Russia's imperial past. Putin praised Peter's empire building and suggested that land taken by the Tsar rightfully belonged to Russia. And he said, quote, "What was Peter doing? Taking back and reinforcing, that's what he did. And it looks like it fell on us to take back and reinforce as well." That suggests that Putin's intends to continue aggression to other countries that were part of the Soviet Union in addition to Ukraine. How far do you think Putin is prepared to go? And what must the United States and its allies do to counter this in addition to supporting Ukraine?
Well, Charlie, thank you. I think we need to take his words seriously. And I know that the Baltic states particularly were very concerned by those comments. And because he implied that part of the desire here is to recreate that empire, and as you say, the Soviet Union for that matter. He has in the past said similar things. Belarus, as you know, is now effectively under Russian control. The dictator there is pro-Russian, anti-US, anti-West. And so what we don't want is more countries to fall into that category, both because people's freedoms would be taken, but also because it is not in our national security interest to have countries that are aligned with Russia in the neighborhood. I will say what we are doing is we are strengthening our NATO presence in all of these Eastern Front countries. So I was in Romania and Moldova 2.5 weeks ago. I was in Poland earlier this year in March at the border, and looking at our US military posture, we have pretty much doubled our presence in places like Poland. So we've gone from, say, 5,000 to 10,000 troops. 82nd Airborne is there. We're providing these countries with Patriot missiles to defend themselves. And most importantly to me, other countries are joining us. So it's not just us, it's other NATO allies who are actually sending troops on the ground to these countries. Different countries have different responsibilities. As an example, you know, the Germans are bigger in Lithuania, and there are more French troops in Romania. But this is really important. We're interoperable, we're working together. And the NATO alliance is unparalleled. Obviously, it's the greatest military alliance in the history of the world. It's been strengthened and reinforced because of Vladimir Putin's actions. And these countries are now making commitments to meet their 2% of GDP guarantee to be part of NATO. And as you know, very significantly, two incredibly important countries, Finland and Sweden, are seeking to join NATO. They are not just important in terms of global relations, but they have very significant militaries. The Finnish Air Force in particular is viewed as being one of the best in the world. So this would strengthen NATO's military capability. So I think Vladimir Putin thought he was going to divide the West through this action, in part because of the dependence of the Western Europeans on his oil and gas. Instead, he has strengthened the NATO alliance. And what we have done is, through leadership, and that's important, shown the way, but many other countries have joined us to be able to ensure that those countries along the Eastern Front are not going to fall into the same category as Ukraine, because under Article 5 of NATO, we would all have a mutual responsibility to defend each other. By the way, there are about 42 countries now who have provided military assistance to Ukraine. So it's far bigger than NATO, and it's freedom-loving countries all over the world, some of whom are not given military aid, but are given economic aid in addition to the 42. And that makes me very pleased also to see that the alliance, broader alliance, is stronger than ever. So Charlie, again, thanks for your work on this over the years with regard to Ukraine. I'm going to have to step off, and I know Senator Cardin will as well in a moment here. But I want to thank everybody on the call on this meeting who is involved and engaged. This is not about Ukraine. It's about something bigger. It is about democracy, and it is about the future of our people, because if the authoritarians are able to come into a country like Ukraine, a democracy, an ally, a sovereign country, without consequence, then all of us are in danger. And the United States of America has a proud history of standing up to these kinds of invasions and bullies. And we are not conquerors, but we are liberators. And so once again in Ukraine, we find ourselves on the right side of history. And as John F. Kennedy was meant to say the afternoon that he was assassinated at the World Affairs Council in Dallas, this generation, our generation, is by destiny rather than choice, the watchguards on the walls of world freedom. That's who we are. It's not what America necessarily seeks to be, but it's who we are. Without our leadership, freedom-loving people all over the world are disadvantaged. So I thank everybody for hanging in there. I think Vladimir Putin wants to outlast us. I think he thinks our attention span in the West is very narrow. I do notice that the media is not talking about the ongoing death and destruction in Ukraine as they were at one point. But for those of us who care, and this is probably a pretty self-identified group on this call today, we have to keep talking about it. I'm about to give a floor speech on it tonight here in the Senate. I do that every week. And Senator Cardin has been just terrific, not just chair of the Helsinki Commission, raising it in that context, but he's a global leader on human rights issues, the author of the Magnitsky legislation. And as he said, the war crimes being committed are horrific, and the International Criminal Court must step forward, in part because it's preventative right now to try to avoid more Russians getting into the fight, knowing that they may be accused of war crimes and convicted. But in large measure, it's about future would-be Vladimir Putin's who need to know that there will be consequences. Thanks, Charlie. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you, Senator. Dimitri, did you have some questions?
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, senators, for your answers so far. I am here to ask questions submitted by the students in the Q&A section, but I also had one question that I wanted to ask from me personally to Senator Cardin. So obviously this event is about the implications for democracy globally and primarily in Ukraine and other countries in close proximity to Russia and around the world. But I also had a question about the implications for democracy in Russia itself. So given that the civil society is one of the very important actors for promoting democracy, and that it has also been hurt by some of the sanctions imposed by Russia. So for example, disconnecting Russian banks from the SWIFT system makes it harder for NGOs to accept foreign donations. How do you think the Russian civil society itself can be helped to continue putting pressure on the government in Russia to democratize?
Well, first, Dimitri, thanks for the question, and thank you for your being at the University of Maryland. We're proud of that institution, and we're very proud of your participation here. Make no mistake about it. My work in the Helsinki Commission, we've seen a deterioration in Russia of civil rights, of the rights of the people. There is a burning desire within Russia for their country to respect the rights of its citizens. And I must tell you, when I first introduced the sanction legislation that was named after Sergei Magnitsky, the greatest champions for these bills were Russians that were being persecuted or intimidated by the regime under what happened to Sergei Magnitsky. So we've always had the support of the people. We impose these sanctions to help the Russian population against its oppressive leaders. So it's a clear message that they're being heard. Right now, Karamursa is in prison in Russia because he spoke out against the war. So we know what Russia does. We will continue to use these, particularly individual sanctions, against those that are supporting these oppressive policies in Russia, so that we let the people of Russia know they're not being forgotten, that we are listening to their concerns. The sectorial sanctions serve a different purpose. It's to make it clear that we're not going to finance these brutal campaigns by Mr. Putin. And we're not going to let him be able to have access to the global markets that allow him to take those resources and then use it to continue the campaign in Ukraine, but also to enforce his oppressive policies within Russia itself. So our objective, Russia was on a path with the fall of the Soviet Union. We thought we would see democracy institutions strengthened. We did for a while. But then Mr. Putin, in conjunction with the oligarchs, was able to crush that spirit, that effort, not the spirit, but that effort. And that's why you see that we've now imposed many of these individual sanctions against oligarchs that enabled Mr. Putin's machines to go forward. One last point on this, if I might. I authored a report in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee known as the Mr. Putin's asymmetric arsenal to bring down democratic states, including his own. And he'll use energy as a weapon. As Senator Portman has indicated, he'll use food as a weapon of war. He'll use propaganda. He'll use sending people to prison. He'll use all of that to try to achieve his objectives. So we stand with the Russian people. We stand with those who recognize that their future is with a government that will respect their rights.
Thank you so much for your answer. And one other quick question that I wanted to ask that was submitted by a student during this call, during the session is, if the war keeps going on for a longer period of time, for example, years, how prepared is the United States to continue providing support to Ukraine? And after the war is over, what steps can the United States and other Western countries take to help Ukraine restore its democracy?
Dmitry, this is probably the most challenging question to answer. As Senator Portman pointed out, the attention span of our press is not very long. We move on to the next subject. We've seen that over and over again as we try to pass sensible gun safety legislation after a tragedy, that there's an interest. And by the way, we are hopeful that we're actually going to pass a bill as early as this week on gun safety and mental health from these tragic violent episodes in our schools. But my point is that we have to have staying power here. It is clear that Mr. Putin's strategy is to try to just outlast us as far as our interest. I see no signs of weakening of not only the US resolve, but the global alliance that we have against Mr. Putin's continuing our presence. We have not weakened at all the supplies that we've made available. I understand he needs more. We all agree on that. But there's a constant flow of resources going into Ukraine, not just on the military side, but also on the humanitarian side. We are working very aggressively to try to open up ports to Ukraine of food. There will be a hearing next week in Constanza, Romania, that the Helsinki Commission is holding. We're holding it at that port city in Romania because we are interested in the Black Sea being opened to exports from Ukraine. So we are working on all these issues to try to assist, but we have to have resiliency on the sanctions and on supplying the military equipment that the Ukrainians need. We're in it for the long run. I can tell you we have bipartisan leadership. We have an administration that's very supportive of this, and we have an international coalition that's showing no signs of letting up in our support for Ukraine.
Thank you so much for your answer.
I have another question, if I might. Senator. There's been a lot of public discussion among various leaders in the United States about what the overall objective should be that the United States is pursuing. Defense Secretary Austin stated that the U.S. aims to reduce the ability of Russia to engage in such aggression in the future. Former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger said that the objective should be to have the Russian military move back to the pre-24 lines. What do you see as the overall objective?
Well, first and foremost, we need to set our objectives based upon the Ukrainian position. To end the conflict, it's really the Ukrainians that will give us the off-ramps that will be acceptable to them to end this conflict. So we cannot predetermine what is the conditions to end the war. But there are two parts to this. Maybe one part is what the Ukrainians need in regards to the control of their territory and the resources necessary to rebuild their country. That's going to be part of how we need to make sure there's a successful end to this campaign. The second part is accountability, not only, as I've already mentioned, on war crimes that have been committed, but also in regards to the cost of rebuilding. There's got to be accountability to those who perpetrated these atrocities for how we come together in regards to our future commitments to the rebuilding of Ukraine itself. The point that you raised as to what is our objectives in regards to Russia. Russia is a sovereign country. We have no intentions or no objectives in regards to the sovereignty of Russia. The people of Russia should make their own decisions as to their future leadership. Their military capacity is something that is challenging for us to directly mandate, but I can tell you we need to deal with effective arms agreements with major players around the world. We've learned from this campaign that Russia is not as powerful as many people thought they were, but they still have some very powerful weapons, and we need to make sure that we have effective arms control agreements.
Another point is Russia continues to receive record revenues from energy exports, and the ruble has stabilized, providing money to continue to fuel Putin's war. To what extent are the sanctions placed on Russia by the United States and its allies actually working? And are additional sanctions needed? And if so, what kind of sanctions?
Yes, the Helsinki Commission has held a hearing specifically on this issue. The sanctions are not as comprehensive as they need to be. We need to impose sanctions on any banking institution in Russia that's contributing to the war effort. So as we put a sanction on one bank, they're using other banks to accomplish the same thing within Russia. So we need a more comprehensive structure on sanctions on Russia's banking institutions. And secondly, we have to look at secondary sanctions. Those who are purchasing Russia oil, they need, or gas, we need to impose sanctions on those companies. And they may be under another country's domain. So we recognize that. So yes, we need more comprehensive sanctions. The current sanction regime, although it is effective, is not as effective as it needs to be, particularly as it relates to energy revenues. So yes, we need a much more comprehensive network. We're looking at legislation now. Senator Portman and I both serve on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So we are looking at legislation that will tighten up the energy sanctions. Great.
A recent poll by the European Council on Foreign Relations in 10 European countries showed that public support for Ukraine may be starting to diminish a little. Slightly more than a third of those surveyed want the war to be over as soon as possible, while 22% said it should last as long as it takes to punish Russia and restore all of Ukrainians' land. A fifth sort of swung between the two. Do you believe our allies in Europe are doing enough to support Ukraine? And are they going to be able to sustain support over time as the war continues?
Right. Well, this is similar to the question that Dimitri asked. I think at this moment, Europe is doing is a major contributor to the Ukraine effort, that we've seen tremendous unity, that we've been able to at times impose sanctions that we know are more difficult to enforce in Europe, but yet Europe has stepped up to take on those sanctions. And certainly the supply network of defensive equipment has been very heavily supported in Europe. So I think to date, we have seen the type of cooperation and unity that is necessary, but we know the pressure on our economies. We know the pressure on oil prices. We know the pressure on other events occurring in individual countries, as well as world events that are causing attention. So we are concerned about maintaining the strength of our alliance long term. At this particular moment, I think we've been able to do it, but we need to pay attention to the fact that if public opinion starts to change, it could affect our ability to maintain this strength moving forward.
I see. Senator Portman mentioned that Putin is using food as a weapon and blocking the Ukraine ports. 20 million tons of grain are stuck in silos in Ukraine because of Russia's blockade of those Ukrainian ports. Countries in the Middle East and Africa in particular are facing starvation if that grain cannot be shipped. Talks between Ukraine and Russia brokered by the UN and Turkey seem to have broken down. And so the question is, should the US and its allies provide naval escorts for grain ships from Ukrainian ports?
I think that's under discussion now, how we can have safe passage in the Black Sea particularly. That's one of the issues that we are talking about. So there are different ways to handle the transport. We first need to make sure that we can get the product to a port, and then we can talk about how we can make sure it safely reaches its destinations. But I think if you look at the fact that people say, how are we ever going to get all this equipment into Ukraine where it was needed? And we got it into Ukraine where it was needed. So our intelligence sources and our supply networks have been very effective to date. We're confident that we'll be able to figure out a path forward. We do believe very strongly that Ukraine needs to be able to, the world needs to benefit from Ukraine's agricultural economy, and Ukraine needs those resources. So this is a very, very high priority for us.
Great. Those are our questions. Senator Cardin, do you have a finishing statement?
Sure, and I think Senator Portman's concluding comments are really timely. I am very proud of the Ukrainians, what the Ukrainian people have been able to do, their leadership and their people and their soldiers. They need us to stick with them. Look, Mr. Putin's in for the long term. We need to have resiliency here. We have to understand there's not going to be a quick end, and that we need to be able to stay with our commitment to Ukraine. That means we're going to continue to see the need for additional resources being devoted. We're going to have to approve that in Congress, and we're going to need the support of the public on this. We need to be able to engage the public so they understand this is not just about freedom of Ukraine. It's about the freedom of Europe and the freedom of the United States. This is truly a campaign to preserve our national security and democratic institutions. We need to get that point well understood. And we need to make sure that we understand we have short-term objectives, but also long-term objectives. And then give the Ukrainians, give Mr. Zelensky the space he needs and the support he needs so that he can determine when and it's advisable to negotiate a way to end the act of shooting. We want that to happen, obviously, as soon as possible. But we don't want it to be under circumstances that compromise Ukraine's sovereignty. And with that, I thank both of our universities that are with us and thank all those that are on this call. Thank you for your engagement on this issue. The Big Ten family does a lot of really good things. And Ohio State and University of Maryland are two of the major players in the Big Ten. And you're playing a major part of this incredibly important democratic forum. So thank you all for everything you do.
And thank you, Senator, and thank you to Senator Portman to both of you for your very interesting and insightful comments today, but also more importantly, for all the work that you're doing in the United States Senate and elsewhere to support Ukraine and Western democracies. Thank you very much, Senator.
Stay well, everybody.
Thank you. That concludes our program for today, and thanks to all those who joined us. And we look forward to the next Big Ten dialogue. Thank you.